The lights above the runway flared as the audience hushed to a collective silence, and the host's voice echoed, "Next, a submission from first-year student, Amari Lewis." The crowd shifted as Amari's model stepped forward, wrapped in a bold fusion of African textiles and contemporary structure. Amari, a 19-year-old black fashion design student, watched nervously from behind the curtain, his fingers trembling. Then came the voice that could crush dreams in a single breath. Celeste Vaughn, the notorious fashion critic known for destroying young careers, raised her mic. "What is this, a cultural costume party?" Celeste said, her voice soaked in arrogance. Gasps spread across the room. The model froze mid-walk. Celeste stood, slow claps echoing. "I didn't know we were reviewing a school play." Amari felt every eye turn. Murmurs filled the air. Laughter, confusion, pity. One whispered, "That's embarrassing." Another said, "What was he thinking?" The judges exchanged glances. The moment stretched endlessly. Amari's heart pounded. His vision blurred. Then came the final blow. Celeste looked directly at him from the panel. "Fashion is about taste. This is tacky." The room broke into awkward claps, unsure whether to support or flee the discomfort. Amari turned away, eyes wet, breath caught in his throat. He whispered to himself, "I shouldn't have tried." Amari stood frozen backstage, ears ringing from the cruel laughter still echoing in his head. A fellow student walked by, avoiding eye contact. Others whispered, as if his failure might rub off on them. He kept walking down the hall, trying to breathe. He passed a mirror but didn't dare look. Outside, the sky had darkened, rain lightly tapping the windows. He found an empty classroom and collapsed onto a chair. His trembling hands reached into his backpack. He pulled out the sketchpad that held the soul of his designs. The bold lines, vibrant colors, the culture in every curve, it all felt like a lie now. He flipped through pages, each turn heavier than the last. "Am I delusional?" he whispered. His phone vibrated. A message, "Sorry man. That was brutal." Another, "What even was that outfit?" The rain outside turned to a steady pour. He hunched over his desk, sketchpad open, tears falling freely. The lights in the room flickered once. And then he was just still, like the air had gone out of him. The pages of the sketchpad told a different story. One not meant for ridicule but for celebration. One page held a design inspired by his late grandmother's head wraps. Another pulled from Maasai beadwork. He remembered how she'd sit him at the kitchen table and say, "There's royalty in your roots, baby." He once believed that. His pencil had always been his weapon, his voice. But tonight, he felt silenced. He gently traced a design with his finger, as if trying to feel the spirit within it. Suddenly, he remembered his first fashion contest in middle school. He had stitched his mom's old curtains into a cape. She had cheered like he'd walked Paris Fashion Week. He smiled faintly at the memory. Then his expression hardened. He turned to a blank page. He wrote in bold letters, "You will see me." The tears had stopped. His breathing slowed. He stared at the page for a long time. Something stirred. Not anger, not despair, but defiance. Later that night, Amari sat cross-legged on his bed, wrapped in a blanket, headphones on. He scrolled through his old voice memos and found one titled, "Grandma, 2017. He pressed play. Her voice crackled but clear. "Never let them tell you what beauty is, sugar. We've been beautiful." His eyes closed. Her voice filled the room. He clutched the pendant she gave him. "You got magic in them fingers. Let 'em talk. One day they'll follow you." Her laugh echoed in his chest. It was like she never left. Amari opened his laptop. He reopened his portfolio folder. There were 56 designs. He began sorting, dragging a few into a new folder labeled Rebirth. His fingers moved with focus now. Music played faintly. Outside, thunder rumbled. But inside, something else rumbled. A storm that belonged to him. He wasn't sure what he'd create next. But it would be for him. and it would be louder than ever before. The next morning, the sun barely peeked through the blinds. Amari sat at his desk again. Sketchpad open, undinable. Fresh page. He stared at it a while, breathing slow and steady. His pencil hovered, then moved. Lines began to appear, sharp, elegant, unapologetic. Fabric swirls. Regal posture. Bold shoulders. Gold and deep brown tones. His movements were precise, like he was stitching dignity into every stroke. Outside, the city began to stir, unaware of what was being reborn in that small room. He paused, looked up, then down again. And then, he ripped out the first design he drew last night. Crumpled it. Tossed it aside. It wasn't enough. He started again. Faster. Stronger. Freer dot. The page filled quickly. He leaned back, smiling slightly. Then he whispered, This one's for her. And for the first time since the showcase, he felt something real, hope. The morning after his emotional turning point, Amari walked into his kitchen where his mother stood frying plantains, humming softly to an old gospel tune. Her eyes lifted, and she paused. You didn't sleep, did you? She asked. Amari shook his head, rubbing his neck. She turned down the stove and faced him fully. You can't let them break your spirit, baby. He sat at the table, eyes tired but determined. They laughed at me, Ma, like I was a joke. She placed a warm plate in front of him, kneeling beside him. You come from kings, Amari. They laughed at Malcolm too. At Maya. Until they didn't. Her voice was soft but firm. You want to quit, you quit, but if you stand again, you stand taller. Amari looked at her, then down at his plate. His hands weren't trembling anymore. I'm not quitting, he said. She smiled, kissed his temple, then stood and resumed humming. The kitchen light glowed gently over them. A new day had started, and it was already stronger than the last. Later that day, Amari walked past the fashion school's courtyard, the air heavy with judgment. Whispers clung to him like smoke. A group of students laughed as he passed. Here comes Vogue's latest clown, one muttered. Amari kept walking. He didn't flinch. He passed the reflective glass of the main building and stopped. His reflection stared back, distorted by the sun's glare. He didn't see the boy who got humiliated. He saw the boy who refused to stay there. He pulled out his phone and opened the Rebirth folder. As he scrolled through his designs, he noticed something. The colors were bolder, the lines braver. He whispered, You weren't wrong. You were ahead. He pocketed the phone and looked back at the building. The sun hit the glass just right, casting his reflection beside the etched school motto, Innovation through Identity. He laughed under his breath, then turned and walked on, slower this time. Not with shame but with quiet purpose. Back in his dorm, Amari laid out all his old sketches on the floor. Pages fluttered from the desk like falling leaves. Some designs were neat and clean, others raw and defiant. He knelt among them, like an archaeologist unearthing buried truths. A knock came. It was Malik, a fellow design student. You okay? Amari looked up, gave a faint smile. Yeah, actually better. Malik stepped in, eyes scanning the designs. Bro, these are dope. Amari shrugged. Didn't feel that way yesterday. Malik picked one up, a draped piece with bead detailing. This is future culture. Amari blinked. You think so? Malik nodded. Forget Celeste, she doesn't get you, but this right here, people will. Amari exhaled slowly, his shoulders releasing tension. For the first time in days he felt seen, not as a joke, but as an artist. The two sat quietly, the designs spread like a battlefield won by survival. That evening, Amari sat in the university library, his headphones playing ambient beats as he studied runway videos from global fashion weeks. He paused on a piece from Tokyo, a designer merging tradition with rebellion. They're doing it, he whispered. So why not me? He clicked open a new project file titled Legacy, Reimagined. He began drafting a mood board, images of African royalty, Harlem streetwear, ancestral symbols, raw textiles. A professor passed by, pausing briefly. "Looks like you've got a thesis forming." Amari looked up, trying to find a language they can't erase. The professor nodded. "Then speak it loud." Alone again, Amari dove deeper into the design process, pulling textures from memory and silhouette from dreams. His laptop screen glowed brighter than the overhead lights. He wasn't designing for grades now. He was designing for blood, for honor, for culture. And finally it made sense. His work wasn't strange. It was sacred. By midnight, Amari had covered his wall with pinned sketches, fabric swatches, and printed references. A tapestry of intention. He stood back, arms crossed, nodding slowly. Then he picked up his phone and pressed record. "Journal entry 1, he said. "They saw mockery, but I see power." He turned the camera toward the wall. "This is who I am. Every thread, every line." His voice trembled slightly. "If I don't tell my story, who will?" He paused, then smiled. "This isn't revenge, it's revelation." He ended the recording and sat down, surrounded by drafts and dreams. He opened a fresh page and began sketching again, each stroke deliberate. Lightning cracked outside, briefly illuminating the room. But inside, a different kind of storm had already begun. Amari wasn't just rebuilding. He was reawakening. Not for approval, not for applause, but because the world needed to see what it tried to silence. 2 weeks later, the annual University Fashion Showcase was announced. It was the most prestigious event before graduation. Students whispered excitedly in the halls, swarming the bulletin board. Amari stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, staring at the announcement. This was it. His moment. His name would be on that runway list whether they liked it or not. Malik nudged him. "You doing it?" Amari didn't answer. He just nodded. That night, in his dorm, he laid out his new collection, a trilogy of garments titled Inheritance, Resistance, and Transcendence. Each piece told a chapter of his lineage. Ow. As he adjusted the hem of a hand-stitched coat, a seam split. He frowned. Time was tight. Perfection mattered. But this time, it wasn't about impressing Celeste. It was about honoring the people who never got to walk any runway. His fingers moved with resolve. This show wasn't just another project. It was a declaration. In the workshop studio, machines buzzed and scissors sliced through cloth. Amari worked in silence. Headphones in, sleeves rolled up, eyes narrowed. Around him, classmates stole glances, some with curiosity, others with doubt. One whispered, "Didn't he flop last time?" Another replied, "Yeah, but he's back like nothing happened." Threads tangled. A needle broke, but Amari kept going. Sweat dotted his brow. He adjusted a collar, then redrew an entire sleeve silhouette. There was no panic, just rhythm. He pinned 2 pieces together and muttered, "This is the one." Celeste's voice echoed in his mind. Tacky. He inhaled sharply, then exhaled it out. That voice didn't matter anymore. What mattered was how this design felt. He touched the fabric and saw his grandmother's hands in his mind, folding old clothes into art. That's what he was doing. Not designing for validation, but for remembrance. In the campus courtyard the next day, a group of students huddled together, laughing. Amari walked past with a rolled-up garment in hand. One voice carried across the breeze. "Bet he's gonna show up in kente pajamas again." Laughter followed. Amari stopped. He turned. His eyes met theirs. One of them, a girl in designer boots, raised an eyebrow. "You good?" Amari smiled, soft but sharp. "Better than ever." He turned and walked on. Behind him, the laughter faded. Inside the design wing, Professor Ahmed waited. She looked over his new sketches, silent for a long time. Finally she said, "This isn't student work, this is identity." Amari blinked. You think it's strong enough? She handed the folder back. Strong enough to scare people who aren't ready. He stood straighter, heart racing. It was working. The vision was clear now. All he had to do was finish, and own it. Back in his dorm, Amari set up 3 mannequins and carefully dressed them in his final designs. Inheritance draped in rich indigo with gold beading. Resistance wore structured leather and ancestral prints. Transcendence was ethereal, white mesh over sun-colored fabric, shaped like movement itself. He stepped back. For the first time, he didn't second-guess. These weren't clothes. They were language. He set up lights, took photos, and uploaded them privately to a new folder. Malik walked in, mouth open. Yo. He circled the mannequins like a museum piece. You sure this came from your hands? Amari chuckled. My hands and my bloodline. Malik gave him a fist bump. You're not just back. You're about to change the damn game. Amari didn't reply. He didn't have to. The room already said it all. At the official submission desk the next morning, Amari handed in his portfolio and garment list. The clerk, a tired senior student, flipped through it lazily, then paused. Wait, this is yours? Amari nodded. You got people talking. Amari raised an eyebrow. Good or bad? She smiled faintly. Both, but loud. He walked out, sun hitting his face like a spotlight. Across the quad, a few classmates eyed him differently now, not mocking, but uncertain. As if they were trying to understand something they hadn't noticed before. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. That afternoon he taped a quote to his dorm wall above his workstation. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. The room was quiet, but his heart wasn't. It beat with clarity, rhythm, and fire. The stage wasn't ready. But he was. Backstage at the university showcase, tension buzzed through the air like static. Students rushed with garment bags and pins between their teeth. Amari adjusted the collar on his model's piece, heart pounding. Across the room, Celeste Vaughn strolled in, sunglasses still on, flanked by assistants. She scanned the chaos, unimpressed. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile. As she passed one clothing rack, she paused, eyes narrowing. She lifted the edge of a bold white and gold mesh garment, tracing the hand stitching with a gloved finger. Whose piece is this? She asked, voice cool. An assistant replied, It's that kid, Amari Lewis. Celeste let go of the fabric. Ambitious. Then she walked away, uninterested. But her lips curled slightly, unreadable. Amari had seen the moment from a distance, jaw tight. Malik leaned in and said, She touched it like it burned. Amari smirked. Good. Then he turned back to his model, adjusting the fit with fierce precision. The runway room dimmed as the announcer welcomed the crowd. Lights hit the stage in rhythmic pulses. Cameras clicked. One by one, students' collections were revealed. Flashy. Whoa. Technically. Sharp. But something was missing. Then, it was time. Our final designer tonight. Amari Lewis. The lights shifted warmer. Music changed, tribal drums laced with strings. The first model stepped onto the runway in Inheritance, draped in indigo and gold. The audience leaned forward. The second Resistance cut through the silence, structured, loud, unapologetic. The final look, Transcendence, glided like light. The audience sat in hushed awe. Whispers turned into held breaths. No laughter. No scoffing. Just eyes locked on something they didn't yet understand, but couldn't ignore. Celeste lowered her sunglasses slightly, her expression unreadable. A front-row blogger whispered, What is this? This is incredible. In the shadows backstage, Amari watched through the curtain, fists clenched, jaw set. His silence was louder than applause. In the front row, a viral fashion blogger named Ray Monet typed furiously on her phone. Her screen lit up with a tweet. A student just ended the show with the most moving cultural fusion I've seen all season. Remember the name? Amari Lewis. She posted it with a clip. Across the room, jaws dropped. Screens lit up. People whispered his name like it had always mattered. Celeste leaned to her assistant. Find out what fabrics he used. I want details. Her voice was low, but the tension in it was new. Curiosity wrapped in caution. Backstage, Malik burst in grinning. Bro, it's going viral. Like, viral. Amari didn't look up. He was busy neatly folding his garment. Let the work speak, he said softly. He exhaled deeply. Malik held up his phone, laughing. It's already screaming. The tide was shifting, and everyone could feel it. The moment the show ended, students swarmed backstage. Some offered praise, others silence laced with disbelief. Amari stood still amid the chaos. A girl who had mocked him weeks ago said, "That was something else," avoiding his eyes. Amari only nodded. In the lobby, reporters pushed through the crowd. Flashbulbs exploded. Ray Monet approached Amari, mic in hand. How does it feel being the one everyone's talking about? Amari smiled gently. It's not about me. It's about the ancestors who never got to speak through fabric. She blinked, surprised. Then nodded. You're changing the conversation. Meanwhile, Celeste walked through the lobby alone, watching the press crowd Amari. Her eyes narrowed. No one even looked her way. She kept walking, expression unreadable. She'd built her legacy on judging others. Tonight, she had nothing left to say. An hour later, Amari sat alone outside the venue on a low step, the cool night air brushing his skin. He looked up at the stars, the murmur of fading crowds behind him. His phone buzzed, non-stop. Notifications, requests, reposts. He didn't check them. His mind was somewhere else. He thought of his grandmother's voice, of cloth between his fingers, of being told he was too much. And now, he had turned too much into the moment. Celeste exited the building behind him, heels echoing in the silence. She paused when she saw him, their eyes locking briefly. She gave a curt nod and walked away. No words. No apology. Just silence. And that, for Amari, was louder than any insult she'd ever thrown. He looked back at the sky and whispered, "They see me now." And for the first time he believed it. By morning, Amari's name was everywhere. Blogs, social media, even fashion newsletters. Screenshots of his designs trended across platforms with captions like, "New Era Runway Revolution," and "This is Black Excellence." His DMs overflowed. But what stopped him in his tracks was the email from Maison Evelyn, a legendary Parisian fashion house. "We would like to formally invite Amari Lewis to intern with our couture team in Paris." Amari stared at the screen, speechless. Malik burst in, waving his own phone. "You made W Magazine's front page, bro." Amari barely reacted. He just sat down slowly, hands covering his mouth. "They see me," he whispered again, softer this time, like it was sinking in for real. Malik grabbed him by the shoulders, laughing. "Nah, they chasing you now." That same afternoon, a reporter from Vogue requested an interview. It was no longer a dream. It was the beginning of something permanent. That same day, Celeste Vaughn appeared in a podcast interview. The host grinned. "You've seen the buzz around this student, Amari Lewis. Thoughts?" Celeste gave her signature smirk. "Oh yes. Very expressive. I admire his courage." Her tone was carefully neutral. Of course, young designers still have much to learn about refinement. The host blinked. But the response to his work. Celeste interrupted. "Yes, the internet loves spectacle." Behind her calm expression, the cracks showed. Her tone wasn't praise, it was damage control. Online, the clip was quickly dissected. Viewers weren't fooled. Comment sections exploded. "She's trying to take credit. This is the same woman who mocked him. Sit down, Celeste." Screenshots of her first critique were resurfacing fast. And suddenly, the gatekeeper looked very small, very exposed. The tide was loud now. And this time, it wasn't on her side. Amari's Vogue interview went live 2 days later. The headline read, "From Rejection to Runway, Amari Lewis Speaks." In the video, he sat tall, calm, confident. "They said I was too loud, but sometimes, silence kills more than sound ever could." The interviewer asked, "What message do you want people to take from your designs?" Amari paused, then said, "That culture isn't chaos. That identity doesn't need permission. That fashion doesn't belong to a single voice." The clip spread like wildfire. Quotes from the video were turned into graphics, reposted by celebrities and activists alike. Even professors who once dismissed his work began resharing the article. Malik texted him, "Bro, Beyoncé just reposted you." Amari looked at the message, heart pounding. He wasn't a trend. He was a shift. And no one, especially not Celeste, could erase that. Social media ignited with memes comparing Celeste's old critiques to Amari's current triumph. A split image went viral. One side showed Celeste calling his work tacky, the other showed him trending worldwide. The caption, "Growth looks like this." Influencers began calling out the fashion industry's elitism, citing Amari's story as a turning point. "This is what happens when gatekeepers underestimate genius," one post read. The pressure grew. A panel invitation sent to Celeste read, "Topic: Cultural Innovation and Accountability in Fashion." She accepted. But when she arrived, she was met with a surprise. The host played footage of her original mocking review, then asked, "Would you say you were wrong?" Her smile faded. The audience waited. She shifted in her seat. The silence was thick. Celeste cleared her throat. "Yes, I was wrong." And just like that, the crowd erupted. In applause, in approval, in satisfaction. That night, Amari walked through the campus garden alone, the same path he had taken weeks ago when the world mocked him. Now, the same walk felt different. He stopped near the reflecting pool, watching the ripples. His phone buzzed again. Another offer. Another article. But this time he didn't rush to respond. He just stood there, taking it all in. He remembered every insult. Every time he doubted himself. Every tear shed behind locked dorm doors. And still, he was here. He whispered to the still air, "Not in spite of them. Because of me." His reflection shimmered on the water, not distorted but full, complete. The wind moved through the trees like applause. And for the first time he allowed himself to smile, not for the world, but for the boy who once thought no one would ever see him. Weeks after the showcase, Amari stood inside the Paris headquarters of Maison Aveline. The air smelled of luxury, linen, dye, polished marble. His suitcase sat beside him, untouched. Designers walked past with clipboards and tape measures, murmuring in French. A senior creative director greeted him with a firm handshake. "Bienvenue, Amari. You're not here to copy, you're here to challenge." Amari smiled, humble but resolute. As they toured the atelier, he saw shelves of rare textiles, archived silhouettes, and sketches dating back decades. But what excited him wasn't the glamour, it was the space to build his voice. In the corner of the room stood a blank mannequin, draped only with a label, "Apprentice 29. That was him. Clean slate. But one backed by purpose. The director gestured to it. "This one's yours." Amari nodded. "Then I better make it count." Outside, the sun struck the window pane. Inside, he had just stepped into a new beginning. Back home, Celeste's world was shifting. Her weekly column was quietly pulled. Collaborators grew distant. At her once bustling office, only a few loyal staff remained. She sat at her glass desk, watching a clip from Amari's Vogue interview. She paused, replayed it, leaned in. "Culture isn't chaos. Identity doesn't need permission." The words echoed in her office, too loud to ignore. She clicked through online articles about the new vanguard of fashion, none of which mentioned her. Her name faded, replaced by voices like Amara's, fresh, raw, real. She closed her laptop. For the first time in years, she wasn't leading the conversation, she was chasing it. She stood, walked to the wall of framed magazine covers featuring her face, and one by one, began taking them down. Her reflection in the glass stared back, not proud, uncertain. The throne she sat on wasn't made for change. And change had already walked in. Meanwhile, Amari visited a quiet neighborhood elementary school in Brooklyn, invited by a teacher who had seen his rise. Inside the small gymnasium, rows of young black and brown students sat cross-legged, eyes wide with wonder. Amari stood before them, holding up one of his early sketchbooks. "I drew this when I was your age," he said. "I thought no one would care, but I kept going." A little girl raised her hand. "Did they laugh at you?" Amari smiled gently. "Oh yeah, but then they watched." Laughter filled the room. He held up a fabric sample. "You don't need to fit in. You need to create where no one's ever looked." The kids erupted into questions, inspiration igniting like wildfire. When he left, he passed a classroom with crayon drawings taped to the door. One stood out, bold colors, sharp lines, and a note beneath, inspired by Amari. His eyes welled up. "This," he whispered, "is everything." That night, Amari sat on his childhood porch with his mother. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the streetlights buzzed softly. She poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs. "Paris looks good on you," she teased. He laughed. "It's wild. They listen now." She studied him for a moment. "They always should, Vev, but what matters is, you listened first." He nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling in. Fireflies flickered in the yard. He looked up at the stars, the same ones he used to stare at when dreaming through his window. "You think I'm doing it right?" he asked. She leaned in. "Baby, you're doing it honest. That's better." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence was filled with peace. The kind of peace that comes after standing your ground. And being seen, not because you shouted, but because you stayed. At Maison Evelyn, Amari unveiled his first capsule collection. A 6-look story blending West African architecture with futuristic tailoring. Industry insiders filled the small showroom. Cameras clicked. The final model walked out in a structured cobalt piece layered with embroidered history. Applause erupted. In the crowd, a new class of designers watched, wide-eyed, knowing doors were opening for them too. Later, backstage, Amari stood alone, hands on the garment rack, breathing it all in. The collection wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space. His mentor approached. "You ready for what's next?" Amari looked up, calm and sure. "I've always been ready, they just weren't." Outside, Paris glowed under nightfall. But inside the atelier, something brighter had taken root. Amari wasn't just part of the industry now. He was shaping it. And no one could unsee him again. Months later, Amari stepped onto the runway, not behind the scenes, but at the front of it. His debut collection for Maison Evelyn was the closing show of Paris Fashion Week. A full house. Celebrities. Critics. Icons. He wore a crisp, all-black tailored suit, understated yet commanding. The lights dimmed. Music swelled. One by one, his models emerged, each look bolder than the last, marrying ancestral silhouettes with modern edge. The crowd was silent at first, then slowly erupted in awe. Amari stood at the end of the catwalk, breath steady, spine straight. As the final model passed him, he stepped forward, joining the lineup. Flashbulbs exploded. The fashion world had seen many stars. But tonight it saw a force. He raised his head, scanned the crowd. He wasn't a guest anymore. He was the moment. He was the future. And this walk wasn't for approval. It was a victory march. In the front row sat his mother, eyes shimmering, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore a handmade dress Amari had sewn for her before leaving Brooklyn. Beside her sat Ray Monet, wiping a tear as she whispered, "He did it." A spotlight touched their faces as Amari walked forward to take his final bow. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked straight at his mother. Their eyes met across the sea of flashes and applause. Her face broke into a soft, proud smile. The kind that said, "I always knew." He placed his hand over his heart. She nodded once. That was their moment. Untouched, unscripted, real. In that instant, all the awards, acclaim, and fame meant nothing next to that single connection. The world could keep its titles. This was his crown. And she had always been his foundation. As the final applause faded, the cameras still rolled. The crowd stood. Fashion editors whispered to each other. One muttered, "A new standard." Another, "He's not following trends, he's rewriting them." Amari's team, his classmates, even old rivals cheered from the wings. In a wide overhead shot, Amari stood center stage, flanked by his models, bathed in golden light. The air buzzed with something larger than approval, reverence. He turned slightly, offering a small, quiet smile, not of arrogance, but of peace. In the crowd, Celeste Vaughn stood near the exit. She didn't clap, but she didn't speak either. She simply watched. This wasn't about her anymore. Her era had ended. And as the curtains began to fall, the fashion world felt it, not just a show. A shift. Later that evening, Amari stepped out into the Paris streets alone, still in his show suit, the night wind brushing past. The city glowed with life, but he sought quiet. He wandered until he reached a narrow alley, adorned with murals and candles, an old artist's corner. He paused beneath a painted phrase in French, "Chaque cicatrice est une signature." Every scar is a signature. He touched the wall gently. He thought of every rejection, every mocking laugh, every tearful sketch. He breathed deep, then pulled out a small pin from his pocket, a symbol from his first failed collection, and pinned it to his lapel. Not as shame, but proof. He turned, backlit by candlelight, and walked on. Not to escape, but to arrive. There was no more seeking. He was the moment now, and the moment would carry his name. The final frame holds on Amari, walking away from camera, streetlights glowing, wind catching the hem of his coat. A voiceover fades in, the last line from his Vogue interview. "They mocked me for being different, then followed me for being brave." As the music swells, the screen slowly fades to black. One final quote appears in white, bold serif. "What they mock today becomes tomorrow's legacy." And just like that, the story ends, not with a shout, but with a heartbeat. Amari's journey wasn't just one of fashion. It was one of visibility, power, and reclamation. He wasn't the exception. He was the blueprint. The final sound, a single, echoing camera shutter. And the world, forever changed, had no choice but to remember his name.